There are already protests. Electricity bills up 60, 70% in 1 year. Russian gas was the cheapest and most reliable alternative to any other that they found. That's okay. But you cannot solve that puzzle by limiting and banning nuclear and natural gas development, etc., etc., etc. So we're paying up to 10 times for natural gas that's coming from the United States. It is truly lunacy. They don't want to recognize that the European Union has committed very serious mistakes in its energy policy. The rise of populism and the rise of discontent within the European Union is very evident.
Good evening. Welcome to NTD's Fresh Look America. I'm Paul Graney. Joining us to discuss Europe's severe energy crisis is one of Europe's most influential economists and money managers, Daniel Lacalle. Lacalle is the chief economist at the Tressis hedge fund, where he manages over $6 billion in assets. He's also the author of The Energy World is Flat. So Daniel Lacalle, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Daniel, from speaking with friends and family, perhaps even businesses there in Europe, how serious is the energy situation?
It is truly serious because it's not easy to solve what has been damaged for decades. The problem of the European energy crisis has been created with a series of missteps and massive intervention for many, many years. And you cannot solve a situation that was created by political intervention and political design in very little time. What is called the dependency on Russian gas was politically designed. Have to remember that only 15 years ago, the European Union produced more natural gas than what Russia exported, and that reverted because of political decisions, banning production, putting curbs to different types of developments, etc. Same with the closing of nuclear plants. So it's very, very difficult. Now, it is virtually impossible to solve in a couple of months, and certainly it will take a very long time before anything is truly done to revert the problem.
So are we seeing people aren't able to pay their bills? Are we seeing businesses closing? Well, how's the situation on the ground?
If you look at, for example, the business and consumer confidence figures, they're already reflecting what a difficult situation it is. In the case of European households, we have seen bills, electricity bills, go up 60, 70% in 1 year. In some cases, for businesses, the increase in prices has been twofold, in some cases threefold, because energy-intensive businesses, small shops, hairdressers, all these types of business have huge problems to pay their bills. So it's massively affecting the lower income families, and it's certainly creating a very big problem for businesses that, although they may have seen some improvement in sales because of the recovery, are making losses because of energy costs.
Of course, if those small businesses go out of business, we have even higher unemployment rates. It affects households as a knock-on effect. Are you expecting to see that, a wave of bankruptcies, for example?
Certainly. So far, it doesn't look too aggressive because in the European Union, you have seen a very large public incentive program and also numerous subsidies helping some of the businesses to overcome the situation. But it's inevitable because it's not even a question of having higher access to credit or a little bit more subsidies here and there. It's that the increase in household and business bills are so huge that many of these businesses simply cannot survive even if they get a loan, because it's not a question of access to credit, it's a question of solvency.
How serious do you expect it to get?
I think it will get to a very serious level. So I would even call it dramatic, for a very simple reason, is that to start with, the European recovery was significantly slower than what we had seen, for example, in the United States. And at the same time, household and businesses' costs, both for natural gas and power, were significantly higher than those of the United States, twice as expensive, in fact, because of the chain of taxes built upon them, plus the cost of CO2 permits, etc. Now, the situation is truly dramatic, because it's not like we come from a period of cheap prices, like in the United States, and prices are rising. It's that we come from a period of hugely expensive prices, and prices are rising faster than in the United States. So it's adding fire to an already very dangerous situation.
So basically, we have this energy crisis in the midst of a record-setting inflation crisis almost for Europe. You mentioned an interesting thing earlier, Daniel. You said the government perhaps would give subsidies, but where's the money for these subsidies coming from? I assume it's being printed up, right?
That is the problem. The problem is that you cannot solve an inflation situation with inflationary measures. More importantly, you cannot solve the problem of energy bills that are filled. Up to 70% of a household in Germany is subsidies and taxes that have absolutely nothing to do with energy consumption. 70 to 75% of the electricity bill of households in European countries are taxes, surcharges, regulated costs, etc. So you cannot basically give a small subsidy and try to solve a situation that was already extremely problematic beforehand. So, as you very well say, they're going to give subsidies with newly printed money, which generates a weaker euro. Then the European Union imports energy from the rest of the world at much higher prices, because obviously they have to buy dollars and sell euros. So it's a truly difficult situation.
So you're saying that the high energy prices at the moment, not only are they dealing with everything in Russia, their own inflationary problems, but we have massive taxes that the European Union and local governments, local sovereign states, individual countries are placing on energy. Why is nobody asking the government to take away some of the taxes?
Very few people are, actually, because there is, in Europe, there is this widespread view that energy prices are high because of the evil utility conglomerates. But it's not because of that. Energy prices in Europe are extremely high because governments control the energy mix, and they have shut down nuclear, they have shut down many of the gas development facilities, they have put all types of brakes to the different developments of domestic energy. And on top of that, for years, they have been creating a system by which the bill that consumers pay is completely filled with items that have nothing to do with what we call energy consumption, because it's, as I said, renewable surcharges, subsidies, taxes, taxes that are, by the way, chained. So you have taxes on generation, taxes on distribution, taxes on transmission, and then taxes on the final price. Then you have the CO2 price, and the CO2 price is a hidden tax. So the entire energy complex within the European Union is extremely onerous for the consumer, and unnecessarily so. It could be solved by reducing or eliminating some of those surcharges and taxes, and it could be reduced as well by allowing the development of domestic energy. Because think about this. The European Union is now the largest importer of United States liquefied natural gas. What does that liquefied natural gas come from? Fracking. Fracking is banned in the European Union. So we're paying up to 10 times for natural gas that's coming from a source and a technology that is banned, and importing it from the United States. It is truly lunacy.
How do they justify this in Europe, Daniel?
There is a chain of political things that they, on the one hand, that they don't want to touch, things that have been done incorrectly in the past, but they won't change or make a U-turn. It's a big combination of intervention that the governments and politicians always try to solve with more intervention. But it's amazing because it's not even this that we are discussing. We talk about it in a U.S. network. We talk with the United States citizens. Everybody understands it. But in the European Union, there is absolutely zero debate about recovering European domestic natural gas production. There is absolutely zero debate about restarting the nuclear plants that have been shut down. In Germany, in the middle of a huge energy crisis, the government has not even restarted the 3 nuclear reactors that they still have operative. They have put them on standby. So it's almost like a stubborn decision from the political spectrum, and it comes from all the different sides of the political angles, in which they don't want to recognize that the European Union has committed very serious mistakes in its energy policy that could be solved. Not short term, but certainly they could be solved looking at a more distant future. And they still continue with those political, I would say, machinations.
So where does this go, Daniel? Are you expecting protests from the people? Are we seeing any protests already?
There are already protests. There are already protests about the increase in energy bills and the lack of serious political response. But what truly worries me is that there's not a real debate in the political landscape by which the main political parties sit together and say, look, we made this energy transition program that was not well designed. Let's change the things that are wrong, and let's put some measures to reduce in the midterm and in the long term the dependency from Russian gas and the high cost of energy. But there's no debate about it. For example, I find it amazing that in the middle of an energy crisis with bills multiplying by 2 and 3 times, nobody is saying, why don't we pause the CO2 permit scheme by which governments collect about 22 billion euros, almost $22 billion of taxes, and use at least those revenues to reduce the bill of households, or at least stop the system so that at least the power price comes down, because that cost is added to the power price, no? The same with taxes. In Germany, there is absolutely no debate about doing something about cutting the 75% of the household bill that comes from taxes and subsidies. The entire debate is whether they have to intervene the so-called liberalized generation market, which is the remaining 25%, which is not even liberalized because it has the CO2 cost that I mentioned, and because the government decides the energy mix. So it's almost like the political world does not even want to acknowledge the mistakes of the past, correct them, and make it easier. They think it's a winter problem, but it's a long-term problem.
Back to your point about how there doesn't seem to be much debate or much opposition to the path Europe is walking. We see in Italy just now a new prime minister come in. She doesn't seem to perhaps toe the line of the European Union. We see the European Union saying they may have tools to kind of combat some of her new policies. Do you expect more of this kind of quote-unquote populism to come about in Europe because of this issue?
I think it's rising, and I think that the rise of populism and the rise of discontent within the European Union is very evident. Politicians in the major parties don't want to acknowledge it. They say that it's, that these are fringe parties, but in France, Marine Le Pen almost won the elections. In Italy, the populist right has won the elections. In so many different countries, we recently saw it also in Sweden, in other areas. There is certainly a very high level of discontent with top-down policies coming from even unelected politicians that decide what has to be done. And when they make a mistake, we all make mistakes. There's no problem in making mistakes. What I find absolutely astonishing is that you make mistakes, and instead of recognizing those mistakes and putting measures to limit those problems in the future, what they decide to resort to is to tax increases and freedom, and taking away freedom from people by forcing consumption shutdowns, etc. So the unwillingness to change mistakes that are, by the way, easily solvable. They're not things that are impossible to solve. There are things that can be done. So I think that is very, very dangerous, because by misanalyzing the rise of populism as some sort of, people don't know how to vote, they're not listening to the people that really know, you end up missing the reality of a European Union that is truly suffering from these measures in energy and in other things like immigration. But not understanding the discontent is not something is something that is truly dangerous, in my opinion.
Do you worry about the future of the European Union as an institution?
I worry because instead of recognizing that there have been some mistakes, listening to people and saying, okay, maybe creating a system that is designed to make power and natural gas bills more expensive no matter what happens with commodity prices is not a good idea. Because let's remember that household bills of natural gas and in electricity in Europe were rising even when commodities were coming down. So it's not just a problem of today. So all these things, not paying attention to the concerns about immigration, not paying attention to the real wage loss coming from inflation, not paying attention to the loss of purchasing power that the average citizen is living, all these things generate the seeds of not just populism, but somebody coming up with the magic idea that breaking the European Union would solve it all, which is obviously not true in any case. No, so I'm truly worried. Yes, I am.
You feel that the leaders there, Daniel, they're not listening to these concerns that you just listed at all. They're not addressing them at all, even in the rhetoric?
I don't think that they are. I think that when they see in France that Le Pen was almost the president, the prime minister, they disregard it because they managed to, in the second round, see that Macron continued to be the prime minister. In Italy, they disregard the vote that had just happened, saying that the turnout was lower than usual. But the turnout being lower than usual is also a sign of discontent. that you have low turnout and that you manage to get the prime minister that is perceived as more mainstream is not a sign of lowering discontent or that everything is fine. It's actually a sign of concern. And precisely if you want the European Union to thrive, you need to, the politicians need to understand that these signs have to be interpreted correctly, not get together and say, oh, these people really don't know how to vote. That is a mistake.
So what are the leaders there focused on instead?
Well, in Europe, there is a very clear sort of view from the European Union main political parties, which is that energy transition and climate policies are the flagship of the European Union. And we all agree with, taking care of climate and taking care of the environment and being responsible about energy conservation, etc. We all agree with that. What we don't agree is with the idea that the whole policy has to be built on nothing can change and consumers have to suffer regardless. So I think that is, there are two main problems in the European Union today. The first one is that it's unlimited public spending seems to be the solution to everything. And obviously it doesn't work. The second is that the energy transition that has been designed from the political elites needs to be preserved at any cost, and that everything else is expendable. So those two things, think about it, massive government spending plus very high and highly inefficient and highly uncompetitive energy policy, those two things make the European Union grow less, recover more weakly from crisis, get more indebted, have higher levels of unemployment and, more dangerously, youth unemployment, and it doesn't get any better. So there are things that need to be, a lot of people, when I give these messages that I'm giving to you, that you probably, everyone that's watching us thinks they make certain level of sense, at least, in the European Union immediately, you are labeled as anti-European. And that is not being anti-European, that is being pro-European, because I don't want the European Union to end up in shambles and all countries governed by, whomever populist decides to take the flagship of what people are really concerned about. I think that those things can be solved and they should be solved.
Let's take Europe's economy, okay? So let's take Germany, for example, was so reliant on cheap energy from Russia.
Yeah.
What happens if the European Union doesn't change its policies in the direction you're saying and energy prices just stay high in Europe? What happens to the European economy long term?
What happens is that the European economy stagnates and that the main strength of the European economy, which is exports, gets worse because it becomes uncompetitive. The energy transition has to be competitive and it has to be taken into account the most important factor in energy policy, which is security of supply. If you don't take into account security of supply and competitiveness, no energy policy can survive. More importantly, no economy can really survive. So let's remember why Germany is dependent on Russian gas. Germany is dependent on Russian gas because Russian gas was the cheapest and most reliable alternative to any other that they found. That's okay. But you cannot solve that puzzle by limiting and banning nuclear and natural gas development, etc., etc., etc. So ultimately, if Germany and the European Union are doomed to consistently have more expensive energy, labor, and overall costs, deindustrialization of Europe is almost inevitable. And deindustrialization in a European Union that is very far away in the technology battle from China and the United States is very negative, because that's the other problem. On the one hand, you lose the manufacturing side of the economy, you become uncompetitive, and you don't have the technology muscle that the other two large economic areas have.
Just incredible. I think some big lessons for the rest of the world. Daniel Akaya, we appreciate it. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much.